So, one question I tend to get when writing scout reports from scouts is what do you include in the out of possession section? So, if you don't know what that looks like, it'll look like something like this out of possession. And then there may also be like defensive transition. Now, not every single scout report has this. Some scout reports don't even include this. They just have tactical. They have the four particular corners like tactical, psychological, etc. And you can put each of these information for out of possession into the separate sections. But some like to have a real deep analysis. And when they do that, they want to know everything that the player is doing out of possession in relation to the shape, the defensive responsibilities, many other factors. You may just see tactical. If you do, everything can go in there, I think, unless it's a mental aspect that needs to be included. Sometimes you'll just see defensive transition. They won't have out of possession, it will just be defensive transition, which is what is that player going to do once his team lose the ball? What's their role, responsibility? And we'll cover some of those things in this video that you can put in there. But we're just going to focus mostly on out of possession as a broader aspect here. So, what do you need to include in out of possession? We're going to focus on tactical understanding in this video, and I'll do other videos for the other aspects because it can get quite deep and anal, and we want to really understand everything you can include in this part. So we'll focus on the tactical understanding, but there's also defensive actions, collection contribution, which is how is that player within the team, like the cohesion, do they have cohesion with the team structure defensively? The physical and mental traits. So this wouldn't come into tactical, this would come into the psychological part if you just focus on the four corners. And then transitions. So mostly defensive transition, of course. And then there's other things in there like set pieces, defensive set pieces, and things like that that we may need to include. So we're going to focus on tactical understanding, like I said. Now, the first thing that comes to mind with tactical understanding is the positioning. So a player needs to know where to position themselves when they don't have the ball. They can't just mindlessly move around. They have to know what they're doing. So where is the player positioned at all times? There's different moments in that defensive phase. For example, the ball might be on their side and they may have to go towards an opponent. They may have to back off. The ball might be on the other side of the pitch, so they may need to focus on the movement around them or anticipate the next steps of the opponent's attack. Defensive spacing to teammates. So when they're in the structure, they need to pay attention to how far a distance they are from their teammates. Pressing triggers. Do they follow the pressing triggers? If you don't know what triggers means, it means the signs of when to press. It can be a bad touch from the opponent. It could be a pass into a certain area. There's many aspects of that. Defensive role awareness. So, do they know what they're doing defensively in that particular role? Every player will have a different role. Some may have similar ones. For example, a centre forward is going to have a very different role to a fullback in that shape. And then the last one is compactness and shape. So what are they doing to keep that compactness and shape, which is maintaining horizontal and vertical compactness. So the next one, we're going to focus on some phrases and some aspects that you can use with positioning. So the first one we want to know is, are they staying compact? A defense will drop into shape and they'll have a defensive structure. Is the player staying compact? Let's look at how you can use that phrase on the report. So from a positive perspective, you could say the player generally helps to keep his team stay compact by positioning themselves in front of the defence and close to midfielder teammates. And from a negative perspective, they're quite slow to get into position and help his team stay compact. The next one is dropping or not dropping into shape. This will normally come within the transition. So we will consider transitions later in another video. But just for this one, is the player dropping into shape? Or are they not dropping into shape? What are they doing? So we'll look at how you can use that in the report.
So from a positive perspective, you could say that the player drops into the defensive shape once his team loses possession and takes up a central position close to his teammates. If it's a more negative aspect or perspective, or perhaps the player is just an offensive player that doesn't need to do this, you could say that the player does not tend to drop into shape much and instead waits in an offensive position.
And the next one is holds position in the line. So you'll have a defensive line, a second defensive line, and then the front line. But in a defensive shape, it might just be two defensive lines and one centre forward. Now, what we wish to know, what we want to know, is the player holding their position in the line? Are they moving out the line in any way? We'll look at how you can use that now in the report.
So you can say the player shows excellent awareness and tactical intelligence to hold the line and maintain position. And from a negative, the player does not hold the line too well and is often dropping or stepping up at the wrong time.
And the negative to that could be that the player's pulled out of position. So pulled out of position just means that they're in a position, and then because of the opponent's movement, they come out of that position and they leave space, gaps. They're pulled out of position. Maybe they're pulled out of the line. Now, are they pulled out of the position or not? Let's look at how you can use that in the report.
Positive perspective, you can say that the player holds the position well mostly and isn't often pulled out of position. They stay in their position well. From a negative perspective, the player leaves space frequently as they are pulled out of position easily.
And then the last one is protecting. So this will normally be the players in the middle, the centre midfielders, the defensive midfielder, because the central area is the most important part. If you're focusing on centre midfielders, defensive midfielders, etc., you'll need to really use protecting a lot. Are they protecting? Are they screening that defensive line very well? Let's look at how you can use that in the report.
So you could say that the player often quick to get back into a position where they protect the defenders and prevent space from opening. But if it's a more negative aspect, you could say the player makes positional mistakes and fails to offer protection at times.
So that's how you can use some positioning phrases. The next one is defensive spacing. So a big word in football is connection with defensive shape. Are they staying connected to teammates? So what does that mean? It means that is there good distance between each teammate, or are they too far apart? If they're too far apart, they're leaving gaps. Now, the whole team needs to pay attention to this. But if you're analyzing just one player, just try to pay attention to the distance that they're keeping to, if it's a fullback, for example, are they keeping good connection with their centre back? Are they not moving too far forward and leaving too many gaps? And also, are they connecting with the midfield as well? If it's a midfielder, are they staying in front of the centre backs and keeping a nice compact shape there? Are they staying connected to their teammates? If not, they're probably more than 10, 15 meters away from where they're supposed to be. So let's look at how you can use that in the report.
So the positive aspect and perspective could be efficient at staying close and connected to their midfield partner and preventing gaps from appearing. From a negative perspective, you could say on a few occasions they were pulled away from shape too easily and not well connected to their teammate, leaving gaps to exploit.
Next one, sliding or shuffling across with teammates. So this means that the defensive shape or structure may be on one side of the pitch. So all the defensive aspect is on one side of the pitch. And when the team or opponents move the ball to the other side, do they move across together, or is one player not shuffling across? So they have a responsibility and a duty to move across to the other side. We call it sliding or shuffling. Let's look at how you can use that in the report.
From a positive perspective, you could say they shuffled across with the rest of the team well to keep shape. But from a negative perspective, it could be that they were a little slow to slide across when the opposition switched play and allowed the attacker to get into dangerous space.
Now, the next one is closing gaps inside quickly. In another way, it's kind of blocking a passing lane, but it's more to do with the shape. and the defensive spacing. So if you've got some midfielders that are supposed to be protecting the defensive line, but then all of a sudden they leave a bit of a gap between them too much, they're not closing the gap. So if the midfielder realizes a space is opening and moves across quickly, you can say he's closing the gap inside. Inside is the central area to prevent passes going inside there. So let's look at how you can use that one as well.
You can say that the player is quick to notice space appearing and close the gaps inside to prevent the opponent from progressing the ball and breaking lines. From a negative perspective, you could say the player lacks a bit of defensive nous as they didn't prevent gaps inside for opponents to play into.
And those are some phrases you can use with that. Now we're going to do pressing triggers. So this is very tactical. Does the player know when to press? Let's look at how you can use some phrases here.
So from a positive perspective, you can say that he has an excellent understanding of knowing when to press, shown in his ability to force players wide before they receive. So that might be pressing for an offensive player. And from a negative perspective, has some difficulty knowing when to press as he allowed the winger to receive and turn. So this could be a more defensive player.
So the next one is follows teammates and sequences. There's a offensive midfielder and he has a number 9 in front of him, and the number 9 goes out to press the centre back. Does the attacking midfielder know when and where to press? If they stay where they are, then perhaps they're not doing a good job of what they're supposed to be doing pressing. If they do, maybe they follow the 9 a little bit just in case that centre back tries to play inside, or maybe they'll go to a defensive midfielder and follow them. So what are they doing in that moment? Are they following a teammate? Are they completing the pressing sequence with their teammate? What do they do? Let's look at how you can use it.
So from a positive perspective, you could say that the player is excellent at following and reading the teammates' pressing actions by covering the press or marking the third player. That's like an example to add on the end. From a negative perspective, the player is not in sync with his teammates and doesn't often follow his teammates' pressing actions.
Does the player understand the triggers? So this is very, very tactical. This is a little bit psychological as well because it's to do with intelligence, knowing and understanding. Now we can explain just what they're doing. So they understand the trigger and they are pressing on the trigger. So the defender makes a bad touch, the team moves the ball in a certain area, maybe they pass it back to the goalkeeper and he's ready to get there. So we need to explain what the player is doing with the pressing. Are they moving on the trigger?
From a positive perspective, you can say the player anticipates the pressing triggers and jumps out to press when required. From a negative perspective, you could say that the player doesn't seem to notice a lot of pressing triggers and stays in the shape too much.
And then the final one here is steps up to contest at the right time. So this would be more like towards the defensive line. Maybe midfielders would do this as well, I suppose. So if the defense have their shape and then a pass is played into an attacker or a midfielder, is the defender or the midfielder from the defending team stepping up, pressing, going to contest the ball at the right time? So you can use some examples here. We'll put some phrases in the report now.
From a positive perspective, you can say that the player holds the line well and steps up to contest generally at the right moment. But from a negative perspective, you could say that the player steps up to press and contest a little too recklessly, which means very dangerous, leaving the defensive shape exposed.
Now, the next one is the defensive role awareness. So, tactically, they'll be given some instructions, perhaps during the week in training or perhaps before the game or during the game as well. So, do they know when to cover the pressing teammate? The first thing here. Let's look at how you can use that.
From a positive perspective, you could say that the player covers for pressing teammates well and knows when they're required to do it. But from a negative perspective, you could say the player failed to cover for a pressing teammate on several occasions, leaving players in dangerous positions. That's opposing players.
The balance in the line. Are they dropping out and stepping out correctly? So they're in the line. Are they holding that balance? We've kind of already covered this, but are they dropping or stepping out? Or are they staying in the line at the right time? Let's look at how you can use it.
From a positive perspective, you could say that the player provides balance to the defensive line by organising it and holding its shape. So that's mostly like defensive players. From a negative perspective, the player caused imbalance in the defensive line by stepping up recklessly and dropping too deep to play opposing attackers onside.
And then the next one is positioning to block. So maybe their role is to stay in central areas and just block. Are they doing that? Let's look at how you can use that one too.
From a positive perspective, you can say that the player generally gets into good positions to block and prevent dangerous crosses from entering the space at the front post. And from a negative perspective, you can say the player fails to position themselves well to block and shut off attacks. So a block can just also be blocking the path of a pass rather than just a cross or a shot.
Or are they being active and stepping out of the line? Are they knowing when to block or when not to? And the last one is to do with the compactness and the shape. Now, this is mostly from the team's perspective, but the player, the individual, does need to have cohesion within that team. So it's the player's relation to the team in this aspect. Now, the team could be the problem. So we want to know how to position that. The player could be the problem within the team. So we need to explain how that correlates too. So the first thing is stay tight as a unit. Is the player part of that? Are they able to help with that or are they not? Let's look how you can use that.
From a positive perspective, you can say the player shows good positioning to help his team stay tight as a unit. But from a negative perspective, you could say that the player often moves out of position to help his team lose tightness as a unit.
What about keeping the team shape? Is the player helping to do that? Let's look how you can use that in a phrase.
So here is a positive perspective. The player helps his team keep shape by constantly moving to fill gaps and stay connected to his teammates in the line. But from a negative perspective, you could say that the player, his team often lose shape and he is unable to help them regain shape as he can get attracted to the ball.
You could also explain that the team opens up too much. So if the team is opening up too much, what does that mean to the individual player in terms of his tactical understanding? Is he able to help his team in some way tactically? Does he understand what's going wrong and adjust defensively, or is he not really understanding? Do the team stay too narrow as well, or are they staying narrow in a good way? Let's look at how you can use those.
So from a positive perspective, you could say his team often stay narrow and don't open up too much, with his excellent positioning and repositioning being a good part of that. From a negative perspective, his team open up too much and gaps appear whilst the player doesn't help too much as his repositioning is lacking. So that's how you can correlate and connect the individual to the team.
So those are some phrases. I hope they help you when you're trying to write your reports for out of possession aspects. And just remember, try to relate it to tactical. So that's tactical understanding. We will do the other sections as well to help you really flesh it out. If your scout report just has tactical, this will all go in there. Please comment below if you like the video, hit the like button. Keep watching more videos to see how we can construct this section and other parts of scout reports. And if you really need more help, please check out the professional scout reporting course. I've got links below in the description. So thank you for watching. See you next time. Bye.